Welcome to these webinars. I'm Tatty Theo, cellist and director of the Brook Street Band. I know many of you are coming back week after week for these sessions, which is lovely. If you haven't attended, and this is your first one, Lisette will do a presentation this week on the Baroque flute and actually several historic flutes and taking us into the modern day with the flute. And there'll be a chance to ask questions via the chat. I should just point out that all our sessions are recorded, so you can always access them afterwards via our YouTube channel and our website. To find us on YouTube, look for this blue logo. There are a couple of Brook Street Band sites. Some of them are just purely pre-recorded CDs, but if you want to find the videos, look for this blue logo for our site. I know Lisette's got wonderful material lined up for you today, a real treat. I've learned a huge amount when she's been preparing these sessions. So without further ado, I will welcome you to Lisette. I'm going to let Lisette play before chatting, and she's going to start with a piece by Echo by Jacques Rotiter, written 305 years ago in 1715. It's Echoes by Jacques Rotiter, a very famous French flautist.
Well, good morning and welcome everyone to this webinar session. Thank you very much for joining in. We've got lots of lovely things in store for you today. And like Tati said, do ask us anything during the session. I'll do my very, very best to answer. I think the truth of it all is, and I think for all of you who are flute aficionados or flute players, the thing that is always present in my mind is the more I research and the more I delve into this wonderful world, the more I realise how little I know about it and how this is all about keeping on learning. Now, this piece I've just played for you is called Echoes. It's part of Rotiter's premier livre of pieces for solo instrument and accompaniment, and this is at the very, very end of the book. It is in beautiful print. I shall endeavour to show you for those who are not familiar with early print. And this is in French violin clef. And it's really curious because it's a piece all about echoes. To me, it sounds a bit bird-like. And it's really interesting because it's one of a kind. And I thought I'd start this session because of it. Also, to mention Rotiter a little bit. The flute I used for this piece is not a Rotiter flute, this is a Denner flute. I have done a fair amount of research into 18th century woodwind and flutes because of my PhD research on Rameau and emancipation of woodwind in his work. And I come across really interesting information about him. There's been a hype about the Rotiter flute, and that all French music, or a lot of it, should be played on Rotiter flutes. And although this particular piece is lovely and low and mellow, and it's got these gorgeous tones, honey tones about it, not all French music suits this type of instrument. And there's a world of different makers, and this really vibrant scene in Paris all the way through before and after the 18th century. That's really, really interesting to delve in. Now, Rotiter was the first, and his family were the first flutists, and Lully's orchestra. Lully set up the very first orchestra as we know it today. I tracked him and his family down to an area around Paris called La Couture-Boissy, because I was very curious about where layers and makers would be trained, how the whole thing worked. Well, it turns out that in this little bit of research I did into it, that there was a really beautiful forest of boxwood trees. And so naturally they congregated around there to train. And so if you go to La Couture-Boissy, do research Rotiter Museum, because there is one for his instrument in honor of him. There's a few Rotiter streets, and I believe there are in the local cemetery a few Rotiter tombstones. So this is where the family comes from. But there were lots and lots of other makers. I've got a small selection, and I really do mean small selection. There are some wonderful researchers and teachers who over the years have done some incredible work, and I must talk about the work of Michael Lynn, who's a great hero of mine, because of his immense knowledge and enormous collection of instruments. I could only aspire to. I have 8, he has hundreds. Because of the evolution of the flutes, there's been hundreds of models and fingering charts and ways of playing. Now, from the very beginning of medieval flutes, if I take you back to medieval times and Renaissance times, first of all, a bit like the recorders, there were different sizes. So they were mostly in the beginning made out of one piece and then into 2 pieces. And by the time we get to early Baroque, sort of mid-17th century, starting into 3 pieces, it stayed the same way for a long time, and then it started, and this is where Rotiter flutes and hacker flutes as well come into it. For instance, really gorgeous, lovely, mellow sounds. And as you get into, this is the earliest copy I've got here, which is a Denner flute from Nuremberg, which is the first quarter of the 18th century. And as you can see, now we've got 1, 2, 3, 4 joints. And this is enabled for the quality or in the highest registers and more evenness of tone, although that is all relative, and I shall tell you a little bit about it later. So this is a Denner flute made for me by the wonderful maker, and of course I've forgotten it promptly because this time my brain is too much information, but I shall put it on the YouTube. Now, next one I've got is mid-18th century, a copy of Palanca flute, a maker from Turin that also made bassoons and oboes. And again, it's still made out of 4 pieces of wood. But if I show you the head joint, I don't know if this is, you'll be able to see. I've got this. It looks like a plaster, but there's nothing wrong with the flute. I just put it there so that the flute doesn't slide. This is very dense, slippery flute. This kind of grenadille flute, and this is same boxwood, by the way. And I find it's very helpful. Oh, I don't know if you can.
That's great. We can just the darker flute. It's not.
Yeah, it's a lot harder, but the positioning.
Yeah, perfect. That's great. We can
it's oval shape, which is a characteristic of the Palanca flutes, and they're a little bit like the Ferraris of the flutes, and now they're very, very fashionable. And I have one because I do a fair amount of orchestral work And I find that it really pierces through the orchestra very well. And it's got a lovely, it suits my personality, really, which is why I love it. Then we've got sort of early classical model, and this is a Grenser flute from around 1790 from Dresden, maker in Dresden. And this is that, I should talk about the pitch. The one I just played is a 392 pitch, which is low pitch. The Palanca flute I've got is at 415, which is what we call the rock pitch. And this Grenser flute is 430, which is classical pitch. And this really suits Mozart and Haydn. I've played Haydn creation on this many times. Some colleagues play with a lot of keys, but everything is relative, really. And I really love not having so many keys. I love the possibilities of it. And it makes life a little bit harder, but who doesn't like a challenge? Now, my other flutes. I've got some special flutes for you today. Now this one, now we come to the original flutes. This is a very, very old flute in need of a really good restoring. But it's very precious. It's a Potter flute from London. Richard Potter, which lived from 1728 to 1848. He's an English flute maker working in Flute Street. And if I show you, I don't know if you'll be able to see. If I turn it to the light, you've got the maker.
Yeah, yes, you can just about read Potter, and I can see Fleet Street just about.
That's it.
The wood. Yep.
It is wonderful how these instruments position themselves. And there's a lot to English flute making, actually, and we'll come to that in a little short while. But anyway, again, 4 bits, 5 parts, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, a few keys now added and lined with metal lining, which is supposed to give the sound a more robust sound. This is missing the top bit and this bottom bit here, but I will get it restored, try to. It's a very special instrument. I've had it for a few years, but there's been so many other things to do, but one of these days I am going to do it. Then we've got these 2 beautiful specimens of 19th century English flute making. Now this is Lincolnshire, comes from Lincolnshire, and it's a band flute. As you can see, it's got its own system. I have actually never found a fingering chart for this flute. It's beautifully playable. It's been restored, and I shall talk a little bit about Mr. Haswell later on. A wonderful man and restorer, very kind. And this one, 19th century, this is a very, very special flute. This is a Rudall Carte, made in 1897 in London. And this one now has what we call the boom system. Notice that it's got pads without holes. That came later. But it's caucus wood with metal mount. And it's been fully restored. And there's a really special story about this. I will take great honour and pleasure telling you all very, very soon.
Lisette, can I just clarify, the Bohm system is the key system on a flute that anyone learning flute today, a modern
will do.
Flute,
Absolutely.
will follow. Yep.
Here we've got it. Here we've got it. This is Yamaha student flutes that a lot of people, and they're lovely instruments to learn to play in. And you can see it's fully metal. And there were metal flutes in the 19th century too. There's different models. There's a whole world of sizes as well. We've not covered piccolos or anything like that, but I'll come to that in a little bit. And this is an Arty flute, which I am told is now vintage, like me. This was a flute I played in as a teenager. It's loud and brash and big and bold. And it's got an extra E. It's a B foot. flute. And this one, as you can see, only has 2. And there we have it. This one now has the open holes. But I don't think they make them anymore, apparently.
Yes, I'm sure you're planning to play them, but we've got this beautiful sound of your early flute from the Rotiter. Can you just play a note on a metal flute for the comparison?
Yes, that's really, really good idea. Now, when we talk about sound production and tone, I mean, there's so much. When we really come to the crunch of what makes the difference between an early flute and a modern day flute. Now, if I choose my Palanca flute here, there is something about this, what they call simple system flutes. Again, a bit like the recorder, that is nothing, there's nothing simple about that. There's something also about the way they are wonderfully supposed to be out of tune, and I come to this. If I play this instrument, by the way, this is my Palanca flute, 415, and Baroque flutes are in the key of D. There were other flutes, 6 flutes, for instance. There's at the time as well. They're shorter, they're slightly longer. There were Baroque flutes with a C note as well, and modern flutes have alto flutes and bass flutes. You've got these great, big, giant serpentine flutes as well. So there's a whole world in there. But that's not certainly something I know so much about. If I play you, these instruments are not exactly in tune. Have a listen. I suppose I'm so used to playing them that I can hear I'm already doing things with my hands to try and tune them up. But there's something about the magic of the uneven tone and the weak notes and the strong notes, fork notes, which give these instruments it's like a little bit of magic. Now, if I play to you, there are things like in these instruments, for instance, such as enharmonic notes, were really quite different. For instance, we have different fingerings for F sharps and G flat. So here's an F sharp, which typically in these instruments is quite flat, so we kind of also typically have to lip it up. This is a G flat, this is an F.
Just to clarify for our younger listeners, an enharmonic note is, as you said, explain, Lisette, briefly, an F sharp, which might also be known as a G flat. In Baroque times, they are definitely not the same notes.
Not the same. And so basically, it's notes that sound, that look the same on paper, but you've got that have different notes but sound the same, basically, in really simple terms. And that's it. And for instance, B flat and A sharp. So B flat, A sharp. Can you hear it, the difference?
There's a softer quality to the sound.
Yes, and I will come to how you break down the instrument, what things that were added, the keys to even out the sound. Later, we have to do it all with our fingers. And so we're taking mostly with the forked fingerings, strong open notes, and cut them in half to get the harmonic that makes the sound we want. And that's where you get the really gentle, soft sounds that, of course, the Baroque composers explored so beautifully. And I will play a little bit of Bach to exemplify it in particular. There's things such as leading notes, D, C sharp to D. Which are quite flat. I'm quite used to sort of flatter leading notes, but that changed in the 19th century and the leading note became quite sharp. And in fact, Now, let's see if I put my Baroque flute down. Changing between instruments and talking at the same time, and the quality of sound are not exactly best friends, so I do apologize.
No, Lisette, you're doing brilliantly. I should clarify, Lisette said in an ideal world she'd have a good minute or two to walk, to change her...
Just to get into the instrument. So for those who play the flute, you'll understand what I mean, but I shall do my best. Sometimes with these things, I feel like jack of all trades and master of none, because there's so much about it. Now, that's the modern flute. Can you hear how sharp that C sharp is? As opposed to the Baroque flute. So the temperament is different, the tuning was different, the way they thought about music in general was really, really different.
It is very noticeable, actually, that leading note. And as a string player, that's easy to correct. As a woodwind player, you obviously have to do it in a very different way. String players, I'm always telling my young pupils to have high sevenths, high leading notes.
Yeah, it is really, really different. But there is something really lovely about finding your sound, about finding the magic with your sound, and never has it been more important with these early instruments, especially as they have such tiny blowholes. I don't know if you're able to see how small they are and how much one has to do. Also, I have to explain that if you look, for those who don't know, an early flute, there's no key system at the back at all for the B flats, to anything like that. So you've got to basically 6 holes and a silver key. This key is for the E flat. And there are some wonderful 18th century flutes, the Quantz flutes, for instance. You've got 2 keys, D sharp and an E flat. Yet again, the enharmonic idea. So if when you talk about sound and shaping and resonance, it's really important. Again, I said that in the other webinar of using your body as a resonance box, because the space that we've got to shape the sound externally is actually quite small. It has to be incredibly precise. It makes these instruments really tricky to play. But what you do underneath, using all of your head cavities, can really make a difference. Some people like thinking of it as colours, yellow, purple. I've come across all kinds of, to find a sound, a characteristic quality. Others, I like thinking of vowel sounds. First of all, your throat must always be open. And as much as you can, keep your lower bit of your tongue down, so you create this sort of open. So I call it the Aladdin cave underneath, full of riches and beautiful possibilities of sound. Now, from the vowel E, you've got so many possibilities. And different people will suit different things as well, because we're all shaped differently, and it's okay. And it will be really good to experiment. And this is where the fun really begins with these instruments. Now, if I play you as an example of what one can do with an early instrument, I'll take a very famous piece of music, Bach's Rotiter and the Saraband. A minor is a really tricky key to play on the Baroque flute. It would sound that it's easy because it's relative major, C major, no sharps, no flats on, but actually it's really tricky. It's tricky because you've got, and certainly in the first 4 opening bars already of the Saraband, things like G sharps and F naturals, which are gentle notes. So anytime, so basically the principle of it is, if you keep, and I'm keeping my little finger there on the key now, if I have the instrument like this, it's completely and completely open. And if I play a D, nice strong note, then E is a weak note, and if I press the key, listen to what happens. You're not supposed to on the E, but because you're opening, by pressing it, you're opening that extra hold. Can you hear how much stronger it is? F natural, which what we call fourth fingering. And if I play, which is a very gentle note, if I play the main note with the F sharp, and the F natural is made out of that, but it's cut in half the note. It's naturally very flat, very sharp, sorry, and you've got to really flatten it. Now, the very few opening bars of Bach's Rotiter it's got this lovely, beautiful, gentle, mournful quality to it. It's beautiful, and it's really written for these instruments, by the way. It really plays on the wonderful colours of those gentle notes. Now, if I go onto a modern flute, then what happens? Apart from being louder, my F has been sorted. I can play it as loudly as I want, and the G sharp as well. So the trick is, for modern players, is to learn to shape the sound to what really would have probably been intended on an earlier instrument that would make a little bit more, had more reason to be. Now, I must also talk about the movable jaw and your lips. There's so much we're not going to have time to cover, but perhaps another time. I'd like to now talk, if you've got any questions about this, by the way, just even if I don't have the time to answer, I will try and answer by email, okay? I'm really, really keen to invite a discussion about things.
Yeah, sorry, Lisette, to cut into email, info@brookstreetband.co.uk, and Lisette will get back to you. She's fantastic answering emails pretty much before they've even been sent. So
I'm on it. Having two very small children and having to do lots of things all the time really sharpens the mind. Now, I'd like to talk a little bit about flute players and their flutes. For instance, we talked about Rotiter and a Rotiter flute, and there's also Rotiter recorders, of course. Now, Bouffordin is another flute. At the moment, is a really famous player. He was a French player who moved to Germany. He was Quantz's flute teacher and a good friend of J.S. Bach. And there is wonderful research done at the moment about bringing the Bouffordin flute to life, and some makers are already making them. Glavey, who, although didn't make Michel Glavey, French flute superstar of the Paris Opera House and of everything. I mean, if you think that Telemann's Paris quartets were written for him especially, he was left-handed, so he played the other way round, and he did not have a Rotiter flute. In fact, he worked with the Naus family in Paris, who were wonderful makers, who intermarried with a lot family. There's the loose, there's instrument family makers, and there's a breadth and wealth of makers that didn't quite make it to modern day flute making because there's so many to choose. Yes, and then Frederick the Great, of course. These are only a very, very few that I'm mentioning who used possibly Quantz flutes, because Quantz was his teacher, and they had this wonderful nightly concerts from 7 to 9, apparently. Legend has it, at the Palace of Sanssouci in Germany. Now, typically, flutes through the ages were used in character for death, lamentation, pastoral themes, bird song, which is really, really interesting. And I I know Tati is writing. Do I need? Yes.
No, you're fine. We've had a couple of questions in, but
okay, fantastic.
Sorry to distract you.
No, not at all. Not at all. Now, the next piece I'm going to play. Let me just tell you a little bit of background about it. I will talk a little bit more about instruments and their players, because I've got a very special flute to tell you about. I'm very excited about and very honoured to have and to be the guardian of at the moment. Now, I'm going to play you a piece by Martin Wenner called Les Folies d'Espagne, or a few extracts of them. This piece is going to be featured tomorrow in the coffee concerts that we upload every Sunday. And I recorded the entire 25 variations, which is not a small feat, because some of them are quite fiendishly hard. They were initially intended for the viola da gamba, of course, because Martin Wenner was a wonderful viola da gamba player and conductor. He and composer. He is really responsible for this wonderful programmatic music. One of his operas is Tempest Scene Alcyon, which is considered a very important programmatic, something that depicts noises and scenes in nature that we can recognize. This piece comes at the end of one of his books. It's published in 1701. And Martin Wenner himself said you could play it on violin, on the flute as a solo piece. And so a copy of this Folies d'Espagne appears. I've read different accounts of it, but I suppose in the 17th century for the flute in a different key in E minor rather than D minor. Now, certainly the flute Martin Wenner would have needed to play this piece would have certainly not been a Rotiter flute, unless I'm very much mistaken. Please correct me if I'm wrong, because of what the technical demands on the instrument are, and the range and the amount of jumps. And I've got a lovely quote for you from 1746 by a Monsieur Bouillot de Mermet, who was complaining in 1746 that the flute, whose proper qualities are to produce touching gestures and long, held tones, is now used to articulate fast runs and roulades. The tender and seductive strains of the great Marais now seem to have become dull and lifeless. Well, let's see what's happened to poor Marais and the flute in this. I will just play you a little bit, and again, I'll ask the embouchure gods to be on my side.
Take a moment, because as you get your embouchure ready, what strikes me is so amazing, and I know you've got this amazing historic flute to come to, which we've got to do. But the difference in instruments required, because with a string instrument, you know, they didn't evolve very much, as we've explained, and you wouldn't need different cellos rapidly progressing through the centuries until you need to play more modern repertoire with metal strings, perhaps. But so I'm always in awe of woodwind players or flautists who, as you say, have to get around all these different technical problems with these different instruments, and that's just such a small selection there. But sorry, I'm chatting too much.
No, that's good. That's brilliant. Well, this is just it. Anyway, so I'm going to be playing 6 variations. There's only small, and they are from Folies d'Espagne. Now, Folies d'Espagne, by the way, comes from folia, is a ground bass of 8 bars, and it is thought it harks back to Spain, and indeed it is the foundation for modern day flamenco. This is not an innocent, gentle, fluty sort of bird song and pastoral at all. It also has a really fiery side to it, which makes it so very wonderful. And I do think whatever instrument you play it's going to suit, because if you do your heart and if you do the right thing, it doesn't matter. Here it goes.
Lisette. Thank you. And so interesting to hear the flute in a non-traditional bird song role, or you know, these long notes that you were talking about. That was certainly characterful, and I think I caught elements of Spanish castanets, perhaps.
Well, this is it. I've kind of taken liberties, and you will hear it tomorrow in the recording as well. What a lot of people don't know, of course, well, some of you will know that Corelli did variations, and Vivaldi did, even Rachmaninoff did variations on Filia, beautiful, wonderful piano piece. What many people may not know is that there is 18th century French choreography for dancers with castanets. So I think it's okay. I mean, this is not really a flute piece, but something I've taken a little bit. And to discover, and I think it's okay. I've taken a little liberty with my articulation, and I think just having a little bit of fun, it's a bit cheeky, why not?
It's fantastic. It works brilliantly, I think. I can't wait to hear the full set tomorrow.
Oh, that was amazing. Now I am going to.
I'm just keeping an eye on the time here, because I know you've saved the best till last.
I have indeed, and in fact, just so that I don't witter on, because I can really talk about things and get very excited because I love this so much. I'm going to tell you the story about this one flute. Now, I know some really special people are listening in, and I'm very touched and moved that you are here, and I will name you in a little while. And I'm going to talk about this beautiful flute here. Now, I came across it a few years ago, and I realised it was probably quite special because it had the maker's name, it had a serial number, it was in really quite good condition, but clearly needed a good clean and a bit of restoring. I've made notes of it so I don't get lost. Now, at that point, I've got to confess, I had no real idea about this type of flute, and I really was not consciously aware of the Rudall Carte pedigree. It's the sort of thing you probably heard in lessons, but because it's not an instrument I play, I didn't play at the time. Now, this led to a bit of musical detective story. I play and research mainly 18th century music and before. So I got in touch with Jem Hammond, and this is a big shout out. He's got a flute history channel on Facebook. Please go and take a look. Michael Lynn is part of it. There's some wonderful, really important researchers and real aficionados who know far, far more than I do that are there. He knows everything about flutes, and very kind man and very helpful. He told me about another great man called Robert Biggio, who is a world's sort of researcher about these instruments, who wrote the most wonderful, well-researched book, and I urge you all to go and read it and buy it. He's a really wonderful instrument maker. He's still working in London. I was also put in touch with the wonderful Arthur Haswell, who's a restorer of instruments. And it's a very generous and kind man who agreed to restore it back to full playing condition. This instrument, the 19th century flute, and he also worked on my very lovely Arty, who's one of its kind, let's say it. Let's just say it's a one of its kind. Now, I know that this flute had belonged to a little boy in boarding school in the 30s, and it stayed with him all his life. And I have to say that that little boy is now 98 years old, and he is my wonderful father-in-law, Christopher Bull, who is still alive and well, and I know he will watch this webinar, and I really want to honour him and the Bull family and thank them very much for allowing me to have had so much fun finding about these instruments. The historical detective in me was really tickled about this. Now, Christy, as we call him, and Arthur began exchanging emails, and suddenly all this backstory about the instrument I didn't know came to light. I don't think anyone in the family really realised. This flute had laid, I think, unplayed for 40 years. And this was the first time it was really able to be played. Now, I got an email from Arthur Haswell talking about exchange it had with Christy. And this is what he said. The Rudall Carte registers show that the flute was originally finished on the 14th of October, 1896. It was made by Nuremberg, one of Carte's top flute makers, and sold to a Mr. Cresswell. In 1937, this owner, by now Colonel Cresswell, returned the flute to Rudall Carte, who transplanted it onto a modern pitched body and sold it to W. Carberry of Oxford. The original serial number was 2801, and after the rebody in 1937, Carte added a 7 to the end to show the year in which the work had been done. This matches Christopher Bull's memories, and these are Christy Bull's words. I went to Rudall College, and having played a fife in my prep school band, was persuaded to play flute. The bandmaster, Mr. Carberry, showed me the flute he had and asked if I would like it. I did, and I reckon my father must have agreed and paid for it. I played it a great deal all over my training at medical school. My son played it for a while before he gave it back. I have forgotten the bandmaster's name. Now you have reminded me. This, to me, is deeply moving. And I know Christy will be watching together with Michael Bull, his son, my wonderful brother-in-law, who also played the flute. I'm very humbled to be able to share this story, which has such a personal angle. Most of the time we read about flute makers, and they feel very remote. They're ancient. We just don't have a personal connection. But I am honoured to have guardianship of this beautiful instrument, and I hope to play it and make it justice as a professional player.
That's
and
so lovely. Sorry.
And I really have to thank you, Tati, who's the director of the band, for allowing me this time and space to tell such a personal story. I think the point of all this playing and all this research is to try and connect. I think music is all about connection between human beings, and none more than now, at a time where we've all been separated by this dreadful virus. And I think that connection is certainly very present in this instrument. Now, I took the flute back to Christy after it was restored, and he played it. He still remembered after 40 years, and I have footage of him. And I think I shed a tear or two. I can assure you. And that will forever be in my heart, and I'm really grateful for the Bull family, really.
Lisette, that ties in so nicely with what Catherine and I were saying last week about we're merely the guardians of these instruments.
Yes.
As string players, you often have much older instruments. I know woodwind players don't often have that luxury because the instruments don't survive in quite the same way. They rot. Although presumably these instruments with a metal lining are a little bit stronger, perhaps.
Yeah, also, they've been beautifully and properly stored. I think if they are professionally played instruments, very often they can get wrecked because they're used, and that's what they're supposed to be done. You know, no doubt my flutes, by the end of, you know, if I'm lucky enough to have a long life and career as a player, if I'm able-bodied to do it, will also have marks and pads. The pads have been worn down, or, you know, you'll see all kinds of sort of used damage done, and that's a good thing. That's a sign of work. That's a prideful thing.
Well, I know we're coming to the end of our session now. If you have got any questions, I know we've had a few questions from Nicola, but she's going to email you directly because it's specifically about the Lincolnshire flute.
Oh,
but
no. Yeah.
It would be wonderful, even I know your embouchure isn't perhaps ready for this flute, but could we hear just a few notes?
Yes, of course. I will try. Oh, Lord. Yes, I will try. They're very different. I'm still playing it in. So I got it back from Christy only a short while ago, so do forgive me. I will give it a really good go. I have to... Anyway, there's a little excerpt from a Kohler study, which is appropriate for this instrument. It would be that sort of instrument.
Absolutely wonderful to hear it, actually, because I think it's just, as you say, we can bring these instruments to life, and I think that's such a lovely story, neatly taking you back 100 years to the birth of that particular instrument. Because I mean, for your other flutes, they're modern reproductions, so you don't know who played the original.
No.
Instruments.
Absolutely, there's no direct connection. There's only a desire to try and make them sound to the best they can with the best of our ability, really. I mean, I have to say that Rudall Carte were the first ones to be allowed, and they had the patent to the bum system, by the way. And also that at turn of the century, I've learned that the pitch in London was about 4, 5, 6. So it was a lot higher than it is today. And this flute was then extended in 37 to make it come down. What an amazing thing you find when you start delving into these instruments.
Well, I think we're rapidly running out of time now, but I think do look at our website or sign up to our mailing list. It's all available on the website, so you can stay in touch, because we will be programming further sessions throughout the autumn term. This virus isn't going away quickly. We're not able to perform together or live in the very near future. There might be some opportunities opening up in the autumn, but it all depends how things go health-wise for everybody. So stay in touch via email and via our website. Do watch Lisette's coffee concert tomorrow morning. That'll be put up for 11 o'clock tomorrow morning. And as you've seen, Lisette has barely scraped the tip of the iceberg with all these flutes. There's such a huge wealth of material and her knowledge to tap into. So please do take her up on her offer and email questions, because you'll get full and detailed answers, if I know Lisette well, and an amazing source of information. But for now, thank you for listening. Thank you for being part of this series. Do go back and watch again if you need to via YouTube, because there's a lot of information. And it just remains for me, actually, to thank you, Lisette, for being absolutely fantastic and showing how eminently adaptable you are. You know, you can seamlessly swap between all those different instruments and deliver a talk and make it look easy. So thank you so much, Lisette. And we look forward to seeing you soon, either on the internet or hopefully at a concert in the UK at some point.
Bye.